Good evening, folks, and thank you all so much for joining us this evening, both in person and live via the internet. Hooray for internet. This evening, we're doing an event, a very special and exciting event because ACE Week is coming up. ACE Week is the last week of October, so it's coming up in just a couple of weeks. And in honor of that, we are hosting an ACE author who is here to talk to us about her book, Ace Notes. So let me do a brief intro of our author as well as our moderator. Michelle Kirchemskaya, is a first-generation Ukrainian Jewish-American writer and journalist born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. A graduate of the New School MFA program in Hunter College, has written content for platforms such as Geeks Out, Catapult, Bitch Media, Electric Lit, The Mary Sue, and more. When not writing, she is reading, watching an absurd number of cartoons, and generally trying to live her life despite its many interruptions. She is currently based in Brooklyn. Dee Harris, who is our moderator today, is a former middle school teacher and currently uses games to teach social skills with Games on Math. They are a passionate advocate, occasionally speaking about and to queer, especially East and ARO youth. In their spare time, they are a supervisor for one of Busboys and Poets bookstores and for Books and Dice. The two of them are going to have, I think, a very interesting conversation about this book, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Again, thank you all for joining, and let's give it up for Dee and Michelle.
Thank you all for being here. I wanted to start us off by stealing a page from Michelle's own book. Like that better? Turn it on.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. All right, let's try that again. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to start by stealing a page from Michelle's own book. In her own interviews, she starts them with a specific question, which is how do you define yourself and your asexuality?
Oh boy, that's a question. Well, I guess the easiest one is just like ace or asexual, a person who experiences little to no sexual attraction. I figured it out pretty early on, I think when I was like in high school, and just like understand, like seeing other kids like engage in hookup culture and like getting into friends and like I'm not experiencing any of this, but what I'm not. I'm like, oh, here I am.
Absolutely. I know from reading your book, you figured it out very early. You didn't have a lot of that doubt period that I know I had and a lot of people that I talked to have. Did that kind of change your understanding of asexuality and what you've seen of other people, or?
Well, I think I had a good contrast. Like I was around a lot of asexual people, including family members. So it was like, okay, here's what they are, and it doesn't match my experiences. So here's what I am, and like I was pretty okay with that. In regards to everything else, like I did notice like other these people who come up later in life describing a lot of like doubt and insecurity, and I just thought like, oh wow, this is like a really big problem in our community. And so I guess part of the book is like, maybe to people who are just coming out as ace or people who are questioning their ace, they need a resource like that.
Absolutely. I definitely read this book, and we'll touch on this a bit later, and was like, this is what I needed in high school. Because I ended up having this information, but it wasn't through a single resource, and it wasn't easy to find. Actually, I'm going to hop into that a little bit. This is very much a one-on-one book. It's a book aimed at helping people gain access to this information and community. And like I said, this is the book that I needed in high school. But I'm kind of wondering, what are things that we can do as people who are now established in the community to help lessen the burden on those just coming out, dealing with this aphobia, with rejection, with the legal and medical biases?
Well, maybe read my book. I have a few tips in there. I think. But in all honesty, actually, when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of resources for me either. I lived through, in high school, Bojack Horseman wasn't around at the time, and then he became like the only character in mainstream fiction. And then I went through like scores of lists of books, like trying to look for that representation. Even like Rainbow LGBT books, there weren't a lot of books that covered our specific identity. And so in that regard, like, okay, we need the information. So what I can do is like, I can take the accumulation of a decade's worth of like research into this and put it in a book and make sure that other people know about other amazing ace writers like Angela Chen, like a number of YA middle grade readers, like make sure that they know where to go if they want representation and resources first. Help them go, to help them figure out themselves.
I know you're about to list of those.
Yes.
I have added a couple things to my reading list.
Yeah, I have a number of recommended reads in the back featuring arrow and ace representation. So anyone looking to get into more nonfiction and fiction resources, go to the back of this book.
Great. And then this is the book that we needed in high school, which is an incredibly powerful thing for sure. But it also made me wonder, what are the books we need now as people who are past the 101 stage?
Well, Ace by Angela Chen is a great nonfiction book that, as a journalist, dives deep into how society regards sex itself, how it impacts the way that we view ourselves, and how it filters in through pop culture, through legal systems, through normalization. And as well as other authors like Sharonda J. Brown did a book recently on asexuality. Do you know that?
Refusing compulsory sexuality.
Yes, Refusing Compulsory Sexuality, which is a great resource, especially when you're looking at the Black ace funds.
Absolutely. That really gets into the intersection of asexuality and other identities, which is one of the major themes in your book, that our ace and aro identities and voices don't exist in a vacuum, but are intrinsically tied to the rest of our identities. How did that theme impact your work in creating this book?
Two ways. So, from a personal point of view, I do have some intersecting identities. I am Jewish. I am the child of immigrants. I have various medical issues that pop up from time to time, and so I thought like all of these affect my life and all these affect my relationships to asexuality. And then while researching asexuality, I kept learning from other intersectional voices, other BIPOC voices, other disabled voices, and I thought it would be doing a major disservice to erase those voices from the conversation of my book.
Absolutely. I know for myself, I am neurodivergent. I am non-binary. I don't know why I lost that word for a second. And all of these things feel so tied together for me. I discovered my asexuality first before any of the others. And as I found the others, it felt like pieces were coming together. Like I could understand how they all tied in together. And I think that's a very important and powerful feeling. And what do we think are some of the most important things to consider and highlight when we're talking about our intersectionality in these spaces?
Prioritize BIPOC voices. They are often the least heard and the least respected, unfortunately, and they have so many valuable lessons. I learned so much from people like Sharonda J. Brown and Angela Chen. Listen to disabled voices, because oftentimes disabled people are erased because we tend to pathologize asexuality. And so, like, in avoiding that pathologization, we also push other ace and disabled folks away, which is really unfair. So prioritize those who deserve a spotlight.
Yeah, I know one of your interviews covered the relationship between ace and disabled communities, and I don't remember who it was.
Courtney Lane.
Courtney Lane, they're talking about the struggle of trying to be the perfect ace representative and the perfect disability representative, and kind of losing parts of who they were in that attempt.
Yeah, Courtney Lane is a great disabled ace activist. They are also half of the ace couple, which I recommend everyone listen to. Basically, they said existing as an ace disabled woman is like living on a double-edged sword. So in trying to live their asexual life, people tend to invalidate their disability and vice versa. Like people, like aces, like we don't want someone to excuse our asexuality because of the disability, so we need to push ourselves away from that as possible. But also as a disabled person, disabled people have often been desexualized, so often they push themselves away from the asexual label. And so she is caught at the unfair crosshairs of that, and so many other people are. And so we need to acknowledge those voices as well.
And I think that gets into something where we as marginalized people are expected to be the perfect version of the archetype. We are upholding the entire identity instead of getting to be our own messy selves. And how can we work to dismantle that and change those perceptions?
Okay, so a lot of people are familiar with the gold star lesbian stereotype, right? Never had sex with a man, so if you do, you're not a real lesbian. And just like, that's such bullshit. Excuse my language. And so like, we have that idea of the gold star asexual, which is just as much as bullshit. Because our lives are complicated. A lot of people who are LGBT do not realize they're such because they've been kept away from that information. And so if you come out later in life and have the accumulation of experiences, of course, like you should have the freedom to identify however you want, however feels comfortable for you. We do not have the privilege of gatekeeping others' identity. We only have the power to identify ourselves.
Absolutely. Gatekeeping has been a big problem both within the ace community and with the wider queer community, trying to say that we don't get to count.
Yes.
And that's such a problem for us and such an uncomfortable place to be in. But then to see us try to further perpetuate that in our own ways, that hurts a lot as well.
No community is perfect, but it is our job to continue working on issues in our community so that no one feels left behind.
Left behind or left out.
Yes.
So your book covers a lot of ground, including inserting previously published articles and interviews with a variety of ace voices, a lot of really wonderful perspectives on the diversity of the ace community. And I'm curious what your process was for piecing all of those parts together to create a full cohesive book.
Confession, it was a little mishmash at first. I provided a loose outline from my editor at the time, like saying, here's what I want to do, here are the articles that I want to include, here are the notes that I want to add. And then just for the next few months of like writing the article together, I knew from the start I wanted to interview other aces. So luckily I had already interviewed them after my time as a journalist at Geek South. So then I just called them up and said, oh, hey, would you be interested in participating in this project? And they contributed their valuable time to it. So that was always going to be from the start. And then just trying to think, what did I miss growing up that I would have wanted in a resource like this? And then just putting everything in there as much as possible.
I feel like a lot of us are coming at that at this point of the whole, what did I need and how can I build that for others? And it's wonderful to see all of these new things out there. What are some of the resources that you ended up using for yourself when you didn't have these books to figure out identity?
I guess like blog posts on the internet is a very useful resource for the ace community, no matter how many times people try to say like asexual is going into their organization. It is not. We do not have asexual bars like gay people have bars, so our internet is our safe haven, for better and for worse. Some videos online, bloggers have been very useful. I actually discovered the group Aces NYC, which is an asexual support group, through an online video. So stuff like that.
That's awesome, yeah. Asexual support groups have been a great resource. For me, that was really how I discovered it. I found the online definitions, but I found very much the gold star asexual online definitions, where it was, this is what you need, and I was like, that's not me. And it wasn't until I met Aces of the Mid-Atlantic and attended some of their stuff that I started to kind of figure out stuff about myself and realized that all of this was way more complicated than the initial, Yeah,
for sure. And also, like, I didn't have, so I grew up like in the early 2010s, so that was right before the big queer shift of young adult fiction space. I also grew up in a community, again, I'm Ukrainian American, so I grew up in a community that was very conflicted about acknowledging queer members of the community, so like having that in the home wasn't something I had. So I always had to like look outside myself, look outside my small circle to see what else is out there that affirms me.
Yeah, for me, similarly, it was very much the veiled queer references in fiction, where you could be like, well, this feels like it could be a representation, but you can't really, it doesn't say.
Actually, I would like to add on that webcomics have been amazing when it came to asexual representation. I discovered a lot of great asexual characters in that space, so that's something that's definitely been helpful.
Yeah, webcomics, blog posts, YouTube videos, all of these spaces are spaces that have very low barriers to entry, so it's easier to get a wider variety of voices out there.
Exactly.
My brain is now trying very hard to go on a tangent about internet spaces. I actually watched a video recently that talked about the fact that a lot of our ace blog history has started to get erased, and finding access in these books and stuff is kind of a new thing that's helping to revitalize and build more permanent structures. So you dive into a lot of the metaphors that we use to explain asexuality, and I'm a little curious, which one is your favorite, and why does it speak to you?
Oh my God, that's such a loaded question. Well, I'm a writer by nature, so metaphors have often been great. It's also like a lot of time when I talk about asexuality, no one knows what it is, so I need to use metaphors as a way for other people to understand. So I guess one of the easiest ways, one metaphor I use in my head is like being ace is like being at a silent disco and not having the headphones. So if anyone's ever seen, not knows what a silent disco is, it's an event where a lot of people dance, but while wearing headphones. So to outsiders, they look like they're dancing in silence, but meanwhile they're all tuned into like a certain frequency. And so being an ace person, I'm not tuned into that frequency, and so it leaves me feeling a little isolated until you start to realize, oh, I'm dancing to my own music. You know, I'm not lesser for not hearing it. It was a different experience of my life.
And realistically, probably a lot of those people are dancing to different songs, as it turns out.
Yeah.
And you can find other people who aren't quite plugged in.
Exactly.
So, if other folks are looking to get involved in ACE activism, in helping to build a better ACE community, do you have any recommendations for how or where to get started?
Listening to other ACE activists, Yasmin Benoit is an amazing UK ACE activist. There's also Gentle Ace Giant, Ace Couple. I wouldn't necessarily call myself an activist. I call myself a journalist, but I'm not sure if I would call myself an activist. So look for people who do label themselves as such and see what advice they have for you.
And are there ways to get involved where you don't necessarily have to label yourself as an activist?
Buy ACE books. Support ACE creators. Like, they need the money to keep going. So put your buck towards something that's not totally evil.
And I think you mentioned this in your book as well. If you're getting into the ACE merch thing, try and buy local, try and buy small.
Yes, definitely indie creators. I would avoid supporting stuff like The Gap. And also, like, The Gap doesn't have any ACE fiber, so.
I'm not gonna lie, I have bought the rainbow soft patch from The Gap before, so.
No shame to people who like wear, but I guess for asexual people, you need to go a little more niche.
Yeah, it can be harder to find the specific stuff, because corporate pride is still very focused on the big names.
Yes, unfortunately.
Well, I suspect there's some amount of freedom in being ignored by corporate pride as well.
I mean, yeah, they're just like, okay, I don't have anything to offer you, so I can't ask you to throw your money at me. But just like, hey, this gives you an opportunity. If this gives you an opportunity to seek out other amazing independent artists and creators, why not?
Um, Sorry, I've jumped around on my questions and now I've lost track of them a little bit. How did you get the idea for starting this book? What was kind of your process for starting out?
So I have ideas as I write all the time on projects I want to work on, but the one idea that I've been circulating in my head for a while is like, I identified as ace for a number of years, written a number of articles on this, and I thought like, okay, we need a book discussing like what happens when you think you're asexual, and not just like something that goes over the 101 of the stuff like most articles do on the subject, but something that dives real deep down into like how do you navigate the society that's not built for you in mind. How do you deal with family? How do you deal with friendships? How do you deal with coming out? How do you deal with asexuality? And so, like, when I heard that Justice Publishers, which is the company that published this book, was actively looking for ace books, I really threw my hand into it.
Yeah, they've been publishing a lot of ace books recently. Are there other ace voices that you'd still like to see added to the stack?
Yes, I would love to see more disabled voice ace authors added to this. The publishing itself has a very large problem with disability representation, oftentimes prioritizing publishing books with disability representation by non-disabled authors. We definitely need to see more BIPOC authors, we definitely need to see more aces from marginalized communities, like more Muslim and Jewish voices would be great add to this. And just like include everyone who's already there and everyone who hasn't been included.
Yeah, speaking a bit of Jewish authors, as you included a section into your book that you mentioned you hadn't initially been thinking of including on the relationship between your Judaism and your asexuality. And how did that kind of, what was the process of deciding that this does fit in this space and you did want to talk about it?
So remember the thing about just throwing everything in there as I was writing the book, as I went on? So I originally had this idea of including at least one piece on being Jewish and ace, but I figured out that the more I wrote about this, that I accumulated an entire chapter. So I guess this issue is like more important to me than I first realized. And it's also like being Jewish to me is an ethnic religious identity. So for a lot of Jews, even if they don't practice Judaism, they still identify as Jewish because that is something that affects their history, that's something that affects their heritage, and that's certainly been the case for me. And so I thought, like, okay, let's talk about what it means to come from a community that has been persecuted for centuries. What does it mean to have a resource that can actually be affirming to you? Because I noticed that in Judaism, there's actually a lot of clear affirming texts and figures that I could see myself being validated by. Let's talk about this part of my identity that a lot of other people share, because I'm not the only Jewish atheist.
I am not a formal Jew. I come into Judaism from my father's line, which is not how it's
I think you're still Jewish.
Yeah, but I was still raised with, I was raised interfaith. I was raised with some of the Jewish history and the Jewish holidays, and my grandparents emigrated to Ellis Island and changed their name through that. And for me, it feels like a lot of history was lost there. And it was interesting to see your perspective and see this faith tying in a way that isn't necessarily true for me because of how it came into my life. And really seeing that diversity of experience within the ace community. And the interviews that you did showcase that as well, where all of the voices you talked to were so unique and had such different things to say, even if while they're all talking about the ace experience. And it was really great for me to see all of these different voices and hear all of these different things. How did you decide who to interview for this?
Okay, just to jump up on your last point, in regards to my own connection to Jewish identity, so my parents lived in what was then the Soviet Union, so they are post-Soviet Jews. And so at that time, religion was very complicated, especially for religious ethnic minorities. I did not grow up practicing a lot of parts of Judaism. I did not go to temple every week. I did not keep kosher. But the older I got and the more political the identity came for me, I think you might know why. The more I started to seek out resources learning about this, the more I started to take classes that explored the cultural elements of this subject, the more that I started to read other Jewish authors, and I see like, okay, even if I wasn't necessarily religious growing up, it still informed my identity. And so like that is something I want to explore more in my life, and that's something I choose to include part of my own identity. And I think that any Jewish person has their own path to being Jewish, and none is more valid than the other. There's this expression, ask two Jews for an opinion, you get three, which just shows the multiplicity of thought within any community, Jew is ace otherwise. Oh, sorry, can you repeat the last question?
Absolutely. So I was just wondering how you chose the voices to interview that you did.
So I think a lot of the interviews I did were concentrated on specific subjects. So one was concentrating on disability, one was concentrating on non-binary identity. Basically, I thought about people who I already had good vibes with, who I would have an organic conversation with, and whose work is unmeasurable to the community, and thought like, okay, I'm gonna pick people who definitely need to be highlighted for this project.
Absolutely. And I think the interviews you read is very natural, very give and take, where it's not just question, answer, but it's got a flow to it. Yeah, I think that was just a compliment. I don't think I have a question there.
Well, I appreciate the compliment, so thank you.
And going back to those interviews, one of your ending questions for many of them, I want to steal again for this, which is, what would you like to see for the future of the ACE community?
More ACE affirmation. We need more indie and mainstream representation that reflects our voices, preferably with ACE people behind the scenes, like writing the scripts, like being the representatives. Like we need to see more ACE filmmakers, we need to see more ACE writers and actors. We need to see more asexual authors and artists, like getting the space to talk about who they are and their identity. And we need more affirmation, we need more support. We need like people who are allo telling us, okay, I'm not going to do the thing about gatekeeping, I'm not going to do the thing where it's like, oh, that's not a real thing, you're just making this up. I want to see more people like saying, okay, you're valid, now what can I do to help?
Absolutely, I 100% agree. It would be really nice to get some more allo people validating us and trying to be better allies.
Don't make us fight all the time just to say we exist.
Yeah. Have more allo resources for understanding asexuality. I know when I was a first grade teacher, and one of the things I had to do was an online training for LGBTQ basics. It defines the A in LGBTQIA as all of the above.
Well, better than A being for ally, which allies I appreciate, but that's not what the A stands for.
I'm not sure that is better than ally. Maybe a little bit, ever so slightly.
Just to confirm, the A in LGBTQIA stands for asexual, aromantic, and agender.
And yeah, it's so hard to find these resources when, your kids' teachers, or your teachers as a teenager, are being told that the A doesn't stand for you.
Yeah. I think I read somewhere there was in a survey, like, for the funds allocated towards LGBTQ education, asexual people got less than 1% of the funds.
I would love to see that. I genuinely did not think there was a breakdown by identity for that sort of thing. But that's that shows the problem so clearly.
It's just like even in mainstream spaces, asexuals are like an invisible orientation. We're already a minority within the minority. And so like that gets people saying like, oh, you're trying to be a special snowflake. Like, no, we're just trying to exist.
Yeah, we really just like to be accepted for who we are and not have to justify it every 5 seconds.
And not have to say we just want to be accepted every 5 seconds either.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the affirmation, representation, all of those are great things for the future of the ACE community.
Yeah, give us at least a space to say, oh, like literally going beyond the ACE 101, give us a space to talk about forming queer platonic relationships. Give us a space to like talk about non-sexual intimacy. Give us a space to talk about what a gift it can be sometimes to be asexual, you know? Like it's not just a burden. It's not just something we have to fight for. It's something that we can also celebrate.
I think a number of the quotes that you included in your book talk about the fact that it's something that lets us see the world through a different lens and lets us think about things differently in a way that when you're already in the kind of heteronormative space, you don't necessarily get into.
I feel like a lot of the people that I've talked to kept affirming that asexuality has allowed them important lessons in life that they might not have accessed otherwise. It has given them the permission to say what does and doesn't feel good for their bodies. It's given them permission to say, okay, here's how I want to interact with people. Here's how I can define my relationships. Here's how I can just simply be mindful of the world and just not pay attention to the biases and just listen to my own inner self.
Yeah, the understanding of relationships was a really hard one for me. A lot of the libido versus attraction versus sensual was very difficult for me to understand and was a lot of what made it so hard for me to figure out my own sexuality. And I thought your book did a really good job of outlining the differences in the spaces in ways that let more people see themselves as asexual or consider themselves as asexual.
Yeah, a lot of times in our society conflates all types of attraction into one. So if we say a person looks good, someone automatically assumes like, oh, you want to quote unquote bang them. But that's not. Sometimes you just look at a pretty face like you would anything. That doesn't necessarily mean you want to kiss or have sex with them.
I used to, in high school, imagine myself kissing my friends, figure out which one I hated the concept of the least, to figure out who I was attracted to. And I thought that was a totally normal thing that high schoolers did to figure out their attractions.
See, that's one thing. I can like look at certain actors or certain characters on screen and think, oh my god, they're so beautiful. But then when I think like, would if they propositioned me for certain things, I would probably not be so interested. So that's one of the differences or the distinctions.
Yeah, it's the distinction of being able to see them on the screen and be like, I'm enjoying looking, versus them being in your space and being like, so you want to go off to drinks?
Not so much, thanks.
So I think at this point, this feels like a good place to switch to questions from the audience. We have the folks sitting in the room, of course, but we also have our live stream, which if you are online and you want to ask a question, you can put it in the chat, I believe. Yep, and then we will read it out to the author. Okay. Anybody in the room got a question?
Looks like we have one.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was very interesting ideas. I was just wondering, you looked at all about the relationship between ACE marginalization and things like relationship status discrimination and symbolism?
I think I know what you're talking about. Are you talking about allonormativity? Or
amatonormativity. It falls.
Or amatonormativity.
Amatonormativity. It falls into those categories.
Yes.
Symbolism, relationship status discrimination.
Okay. Okay. So just to clear up, amatonormativity is the assumption that everyone desires to be in a committed, monogamous, married relationship as pinnacle of all relationships. which makes it seem like everyone has to be in a relationship or married to be considered valid, and so asexual people or single people or both are considered inferior because we do not necessarily desire that, or we do not necessarily prioritize in their lives. Like how many jokes have you heard about the pathetic spinster woman who like lives at home with her cats? Like, why wouldn't that be a good life? Okay, one of the things I came across in my writing of this book was this story by a comedian in which she talked about a Holocaust survivor who lived past the age of 100 and accomplished so many things in her life. And at her funeral, someone said, "Oh, she never got married." And just like, how do you think she lived that long, said the comedian. But it's just that idea that our lives are incomplete if we do not have a sexual or romantic partner is truly horrible, because it literally negates and invalidates all the other ways you can live as a person. And so my go-to is that if you live your life not harming other people, prioritizing your well-being, then I don't see anything wrong with that.
You also do go into in your book this is not working. You also do go into in your book the kind of legal implications of being single and the fact that our society is kind of built in this way where if you're married, you get tax breaks, you get your partner's health insurance, you get all of these things which under capitalism we need to survive, and how hard that can be.
And for the record, in the US, disabled people do not have the freedom of marriage because they can get their medical benefits taken away if they get married, which is just awful in itself. But yeah, society does often reward married people, straight married people, for getting married. And so that means that we have to pick up a lot of the slack on our own. And it's so that living alone can be costly, as any person in the room might be able to verify. And so like people in general can look down on our lives if we do not conform to the way that they think is the ideal life. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
So we have a question from the live stream audience. Malkin asks, she says, "Congrats on the book. One topic that I wish had more attention is being ace and getting older. I was wondering what Michelle's thoughts were on this." And Kai Simpson added in, "Ooh, good one."
Well, considering, I feel like the topic of queer elders is a very touchy subject in our community. During the AIDS epidemic, so many queer elders died as a result of government neglect, from people not prioritizing our lives. So unfortunately, that means that younger generations have lost elders who could necessarily guide them along the path. And ACE elders are especially more rare in that subject because the ACE community is smaller in that regard. But there are ACE elders who do exist. There are people like ACE Dad, who does identify as an ACE elder, who is so helpful in the advice he and they part out to communities. ACE elders do exist, but at the same time, because they're older, they don't necessarily have access to the resources younger ACEs do. So that means we need to prioritize providing resources to older and younger communities as well.
So I'm not sure exactly what an elder is. I'm 60.
It's a very loose term. I use it loosely.
It's fine. And just coming out as ace. I think.
Congratulations.
I still hold my lesbian. I still consider myself a lesbian.
And that's your right.
I'm aesthetically attracted to women. I saw very different. I am attracted to women and men differently. So that's where I came with lesbian. But then discovered, like you said, I didn't really want to sleep with the woman, you know. And so, but the thing that I was thinking about and was different about elder people or people my ages, what made it more difficult for me to understand and kind of hid my asexuality for myself was that right now or more recently, sexuality is really out there. But in the 70s, you watch TV, you don't see sex. right? And so you don't see a lot of sex when you're growing up, right? And then when you're older, your friends are beyond that point where they're all over each other, right? So it's really easy to kind of say, to kind of like not think about people having sex. Does that make sense at all? You know, whereas the younger kid, you know, the younger people, you know, right from the beginning, that it's so sexualized now that there's a stark difference. You know, so it took a really long time for me to really realize that I actually think differently than other people and experience the world in a different way than other people. Does that make
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Oftentimes I find when I talk with other aces, their relationship to asexuality, it differs because of the way they grew up, because of their access to information or their lack of access to information, because of the communities grow up. I say that any way you come to asexuality is valid because that is your life, that is your path in life. And so what you said about experiencing different types of attraction to different genders is actually pretty common within the ace and general queer community. I often heard bi women saying like, oh, I feel more attracted to women today, or I feel more attracted to men today, or I feel more attracted to androgyny. So it's not something that's static. We often like to think of identity as something that's static, but oftentimes it's very fluid, and it can shift depending on what information we have access to. Like I identified as straight for the good first part of my life until like, okay, maybe I'm not. And so like, as you take your journey into figuring out more of who you are, I just hope you take the time and the grace to say, I'm going to give myself permission to take it slow. I'm not going to force myself to do anything I do not want to do. And just to give yourself the kudos to just like, okay, you're discovering more about yourself. And that's amazing at any point in your life. So thank you.
I had a boyfriend for almost a year in high school, purely because we were so nerdy that the concept of sex never came up in our relationship. So it's different for everyone, and it can be such a difficult thing to figure out, particularly to figure out the absence of something that society is telling you so strongly that you are supposed to have.
Yeah, I feel like with asexuality, it's oftentimes, it's like you're trying to explain gravity. How do you explain something that you can't see? And in another sense, like, it feels like with allosexual people, there's this hunger that they experience that a lot of ace people don't, or that they experience in only specific circumstances. And so when you try to like explain an invisible orientation, it's harder to like show it to other people, especially if they haven't had those same experiences.
So this is kind of the way that I kind of explain it to myself and feel like I would explain it to. I've only really come out to one person, but
Well, you just came out to us tonight, so.
well, I'm a friend, friend-wise, but no friends. Now is to if a person is straight, they are not attracted to the same sex. If they are gay, they are not attracted to the opposite sex. So why can't there be people who are not attracted to either sex?
I mean, they exist. Aces exist.
And I'm just saying, if you're trying to explain it to somebody who is straight, say, well, you're not attracted, you're a woman that's not attracted to other women, right? If you're trying to explain it to a lesbian, you say, well, you're not attracted to men.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not attracted to women or men sexually. I am visually attracted to women, and really visually attracted to lesbian-looking women. That's why it was so confusing. Like it wasn't like I had a type. You know what I mean? And I was very much a part of the lesbian community for a very long time. But I was always the one that was with no one. And I'm also, I also believe that I'm aromantic to some extent too, so I'm still trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
But that is really abstract.
Listen, there's this expression like gender and sexuality are like socks. Sometimes they don't match together. It's any combination out there. And there's actually multiple terms for people who explore those intersections. There's homoromantic lesbian, which it seems like you're describing yourself as, or there's even an older term called ambi-lesbians, sapphic women who just prefer cuddling versus anything else. And so I feel like as you go about your journey, as you explore more into the subject, like I just feel like you have the freedom to decide what works for you. You have the freedom to decide what labels work for you, and if those labels work for the rest of your life, great. But if they don't, you're free to cast them aside. Identity is clothing, You can tailor it any way that feels comfortable to you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the joy of labels, is we have so many so that we can put language to how we feel. Do we have more online questions? I asked a few space beside me, but I cannot see.
We don't, but I have one. It sounds like community care is something that the ACE community really holds kind of central. Can you talk a little bit more about that for the allosexual women?
Okay, so because we are such a small community, oftentimes, and because we lack resources specifically tailored for our community, oftentimes we do have to take care of each other. I know that when I'm in primarily allosexual settings, that people will probably not get my experiences, and unfortunately, a number of them will not want to get my experiences. So that's when I find myself leaning towards my asexual community. I actually have my asexual friend in the background, so shout out to Stacey, thank you for coming. And it's just like, they're my family in this sense, queer people have always relied on families, on ties that are outside biological community. So why is the ACE community any different?
And I think too, there's an element of the found family being so key for us, because not all of us are looking for that romantic or sexual relationship. So it's become much more of a focus of the community to have that key family that we can then stray from to try other things.
Yeah, just as a small note, during the AIDS epidemic, I'm sorry, I'm going to the tragic part, but during the AIDS epidemic, gay men are often aided by lesbian allies. These women, these sapphic people, I cared for them in their moments of need. So lesbian and gay men aren't attracted to each other, but they could provide that bond, they could provide that care for each other. And that's the same way lots of intersection parts of the queer community can care for each other, and we should care for each other. Ace people should stand up for their trans sisters and brothers and siblings, and vice versa. And also, many Ace people are trans themselves. So when we support one letter of the queer community, we are supporting everyone.
Thank you for your answer. We have a question online from Kai Simpson. Do you think the relationship between being ace and being religious has gotten smoother, or does it depend on the religion? Kai also said, Stacy! So Stacy, I think you're famous.
Just as a note, Kai is a friend of mine, so thank you, Kai, for attending the live stream. In that regard, religion and queerness is always going to be complicated. It's always going to vary from community to community. I cannot speak for other queer people of faith. I cannot speak for Muslim Jew or for a Christian Jew. But I can say that as time has gone on, as society has evolved, so do our ideas about religion. So while some aspects of the Jewish community are probably more traditional in what they consider to be valid, other communities are very queer progressive, and a lot of the Jewish community has been queer progressive from an early time. So in that regard, again, no one person can represent the whole community, so there's always going to be different factions that are okay, what ideas do we want about the world? What ideas do we follow? What traditions do we keep? Judaism itself is just there are so many different identities. There's conservative, there's reform, there's modern, and just again, I'm only one example, and you're only one example. And it just I guess it just depends on who you are, where you come from. Does that answer Kai's question?
So,
Yes, I want to answer yes.
I'm really enjoying listening to you. I have
Thank you.
one suggestion, which is that you speak very rapidly.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm a New Yorker. That's a bad habit.
And I really love listening to you, but it's I keep wanting to rewind.
I apologize. I will slow down.
So I just listen slow. One thing that you said that really resonated with me when you talked about sort of when recognizing your identity as asexual sort of freed you up in your relationships to other people and gave you more freedom to sort of, and I think it resonated with me because when I was younger, you know, it was like there was all this pressure of, you know, oh, well, you're gonna have this, you know, it's like every person was like, well, is this like a potential romantic connection or a potential sexual connection, or is this just a friend thing? And I think there's something about just stepping away from all that shit and just sort of being able to experience another person without all of that subtext of what do I want from this, and what does this person want from me?
Yeah, that's definitely a valid point. That's something I definitely agree with. When you allow yourself to just like analyze or like the various types of attraction, you can also say, okay, maybe I don't want to go into this. Maybe I don't have to look at the world like it's a grocery store and look at this person like, okay, I want to eat you, you know? Like, why can't you just, you know, get coffee with a beautiful man and not have it lead anywhere? Why can't you just cuddle with a beautiful person and not necessarily have to be sexual? Like, you allow, when you allow yourself to interrogate all the ways that society says you should treat sex and romance, then you open yourself up to paths of exploring new connections with other people. Was I slow enough that time?
Much better, yes.
Thank you. I just need a reminder from time to time.
Yeah, I think I've experienced that a lot with a lot of ace connections that I've built, but also that subtext doesn't go away when you end up in allo spaces. It just changes. I spent so much time with allo folks that I know being like, does this person have a crush on me? Do I have to deal with this now? Is this going to spiral out of control until I am no longer friends with them because actually they didn't want to be friends in the first place? And being able to take some of the ACE community things that we've built of being more clear about relationships and understanding the differences between relationships into the allo world would be really nice.
Just on that note, I had an interesting answer though, where I was once talking with this person. I had a new interest in magic and Harry Houdini at the time because of the book I read. And so as I was like talking about like, ooh, you're into Harry Houdini. I'm like, no, I'm not horny for Harry Houdini. I just thought magic was cool. Any other questions?
And on that note,
I guess we're ending this one on I'm not horny for Harry Houdini.
I think that that's the best place to end this. I want to thank everyone again who is here in person as well as who watched the live stream. Thank you so much for joining us. You can pick up a copy of the book at Busboys and Poets Tacoma and soon at pretty much every Busboys. We're going to be distributing copies to all of the Busboys, so feel free to grab a signed copy from one of those or from bookshop.org or your local indie. Get from your local indie bookstore. It's the best way to do it. Can we give another round of applause to Michelle and team?
Thank you for Busboys and Poets for organizing the event. Thank you for everyone who attended and in person and for the live stream. And yeah, and I hope you have a very happy incoming ACE week.
One other thing is for ACE Week, we're actually going to be doing a special queer book club here at Busboys Tacoma. We do a queer book club every month, and this month we're going to be doing one for Being Ace, which is a new YA asexual anthology. 3 of the authors are going to be joining us, and it will be, again, available both virtually and in person. The Eventbrite is up, so you can RSVP through there or get more information on it. It's going to be October 29th, so I hope that we get to see you then.
Thank you everyone for coming today.